Well, hey, all my friends, welcome once again to the Everyday Missionary Pod. This is episode 322, and today is a bit of an extension of something I did on Sunday. So as a church, we're going through the Book of the 12. If you're not familiar with that title, it is the last 12 voices of the Old Hebrew Testament, the Old Testament. And it's that place in the Bible that a lot of people don't read because it's got names they can't pronounce, and it talks about stuff they don't understand. And so we tend to just kind of skip over it, fly by it. Maybe if you're doing your read through the Bible in a year, you kind of read it and you walk away going, got a couple of memory verses out of it. But for the most part, don't know what's going on there. And for me, I thought, man, what a cool challenge, right? I always like to dig into the hard parts of the Bible. I like to try to figure out the tough to understand stuff because it's there. It's like, of all the stuff that God would give us, I would say a good chunk of it is stuff that it's hard for us to wrap our minds around, right? Like when you read Leviticus or Numbers, or you read Judges, you read Lamentations, you read Ecclesiastes, you read Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, all of those Book of the 12 guys, everything else. There's a lot of stuff in there where you read for miles and you're like, I don't know what to do. It's a lot of like dramatic prose. It's a lot of poetry. It's a lot of vision. It's a lot of descriptions of judgment or whatever else. And you're just kind of like, I don't know what to do with it. And so for me, I thought, man, this would be a really cool challenge personally for me to really dig into what that is. The other challenge is doing each prophet over just one Sunday. So trying to consolidate it and then make it sort of applicable to here and now, right? Because I do think the scriptures were given to us to go, what did it mean to them? Therefore, by extension, what does it mean for us? So that's kind of the quest, right? And this last week, it was the second installment in the series, which is the book of Amos. And if you've never read Amos, it is a challenging read. It really is. And so it is written to the northern kingdom of Israel about 40 years before the Assyrians wiped them out and they never returned. And it's like God is just throwing down a whole lot of, I'm going to judge you. I'm going to wipe you from the face of the earth. I'm going to obliterate you. And yet throughout, God keeps talking about how they are the family of Israel and he's been intimate with them and he has been the one that has cared for them and blessed them, and they're his chosen nation, his elect people, and yet as his people, he's going to judge his people severely. And yet by the end of the book, you learn that even that judgment is not meant to be punitive as much as restorative. It's like, I'm going to wipe you from the face of the earth, he says at the end, and then immediately he says, but it won't be your full end. And I'm going to bring you back to me, and you're going to, be my people, and I'm going to be your God. Like that kind of thing happens at the end. And so for me, as I went into that particular week beginning to study for Amos, I ended up being very heavy-hearted, and there's going to be a lot more reasons for that comes out in this podcast. So I became very heavy-hearted, and it was a reminder to me again of how a lot of that Hebrew scripture is written to the people of God, and it's the people of God not doing what God wants them to do. And so God speaks very much about judgment on his own people. If I turn that into modern vernacular, it's God saying, yeah, you're saved. Yeah, you're my people. Yeah, you're destined for eternity with me. But in the meantime, I'm going to have to bring discipline to you because you're being disobedient to me, right? Like that's kind of the spirit of it. And I know for a lot of us, as we've gone to Sunday school and we read our Old Testament, we sort of absorb all that and say, yeah, Israel was repeatedly sinful, and so God has to bring punishment on them to get them back on track and everything else. What we fail to sometimes think about is that messaging to the people of God, it continues into the New Testament. And I think we lose that nuance. And I'm going to talk about that today. So this is going to go in a lot of directions. Honestly, this may be a longer than average podcast. I certainly assume it to go beyond an hour. Treat this as like a long form discussion. And the thing I want to say right up front is maybe a couple of things. One is I don't think this is going to be an easy topic. It's not an easy topic for me. Like I don't look at this all cavalier. I think I'm going to title this kind of like a sober warning. It's a sober warning for me. Like I'm not wagging the finger, though at times it's going to sound like it. I think it's no different than the spirit of the prophets in the scriptures, where it does sound like they're wagging the finger when they're really just trying to say, hey, I want to get your attention dramatically because the straits that are before us are serious and we don't want to take them lightly. So that's a little bit of what I'm trying to do today is to go, hey, what does the New Testament say to the people of God, the church of God, the followers of Jesus? What does it warn them about that is very much in the spirit of the Hebrew scriptures and what God was warning his people about there? And how are we to be on notice about those things and therefore to be different in light of the warning, right? So that's part of it. So this is an extension of a particular point I was going to unpack in Amos, and I just didn't have the time. Like, I was already pushing 45 minutes when I wrapped up as it was. And if I would have unpacked this would have been easily another 6 to 7 minutes, and it would have been so abbreviated in comparison to what this podcast can do that I'm just chucking it now into the podcast, right? And using this as kind of an extension of my talk on Sunday. So that's a little bit of the heart there. The second thing I want to say about this is it's going to be a little bit of a winding journey. And because of that, if you can't listen to this from beginning to end, from this point forward to the end, then please do me a favor, don't listen to it at all. Like, and I don't mean that like in a snarky way or whatever else. Honestly, I'm going to have to take us on a journey that I think is very substantiated in the scriptures. In fact, so much so that I'm like, I'm going to do this. I think it won't be fully popular, and it might even be misunderstood, or it might even create some alarm bells. And yet I really believe that my job is to take the scriptures seriously. And when they say something that just seems to be point blank a certain thing, instead of me doctoring it up or editing it or chipping away at it to soften it or whatever else, just let it sit with the uncomfort that it creates or the discomfort that it creates. And I think this might create some discomfort and a number of different layers. And yet I think that's also kind of the tension of the scriptures, right? Like, I think there are warnings that are there, like when God tells his own people, I'm going to wipe you from the face of the earth, but I'm not done with you. Like, that should create some tension. Like, it's really, really serious, but they're still God's people. Like, and I think that is a constant theme. And I think part of the challenge for us as modern Protestant evangelical Christians is we tend to read all of sinful Israel, and I think we put them into the category of not really saved, right? Like, we're not really saved, and that's why God judged them, right? Not really saved, and therefore that's why punishment came to them. But that is not the message of the Hebrew scriptures. God says, hey, Abraham, I'm going to make your nation a great nation. I'm setting my love on you, not because you're great, mighty, the strongest, or the best. That's what Moses shares with the people of Israel coming out of Egypt. It's just like God sets his hesed on you, his love on you. He made a covenant with Abraham while Abraham was still asleep, saying, in you all the nations will be blessed. Through your seed, I will change the world. That's a bloodline promise. Anybody that's got Abrahamic blood coursing in their veins is under the promise that they are God's elect chosen people. That's the language God uses of Israel, not me. He says it's rooted in their descendancy of Abraham. I didn't say that. He said that. And so you really do need to see Israel as a saved nation, oftentimes under judgment. There's a part of me that goes, I still think that's the way you should read even the Israel in the first century as they're opposing Jesus. God's chosen people in radical rebellion. God says judgment's coming on you. But in that, he's not trying to say, like, you're completely not my people. Because when you read Romans, you get to the end of Romans chapter 11, and he's like, hey, yeah, like from 9 to 11, he's like, yeah, Israel right now is off the beaten path. Yet their hardness is so that the Gentiles can come to faith and belief and following in Jesus. Then he warns the Gentiles, hey, you guys, watch out. Don't get cocky, just as much as Israel gets cocky, because you can be cut off just as much as they were cut off. But he ends chapter 11 by saying, but don't worry. In the end, all Israel will be saved. Like, he writes that. You can go read it in chapter 11. I think it's verse 32, right? So he builds this big argument, but he's still like, they're still my people, right? And I'm still their God. Even in their hardness and rebellion, they're still my people. So that's the narrative of Israel throughout the scriptures. And I think we lose that a little bit because, again, we have this Protestant thing before us that kind of puts everything in these really nifty categories or clean buckets. And the scriptures are a little bit more nuanced than those clean buckets, right? So I'm wanting to get into all of that, like the seriousness of God's warnings to God's people about not being godly. And that still has some play for the people of God in this era, the church, Christians, whatever, that there's still a real seriousness about that. And that's what I want to highlight a little bit today. And maybe the place you want to start. So this is where, again, this is your moment where if you can't listen to the whole thing, please pause now. Don't come back to it until you can listen to all of it. And if you can't listen to all of it, just don't ever listen to it because, again, you're going to have to, if you just soundbite this, you're going to miss the overall flow of things, right? Because I'm going to kind of start in what I think is one kind of problem, and then I want to walk into the scriptures on a particular topic, and then I want to talk about the implications of that for us as American evangelical Christians, where I think we are much more in a precarious spot according to the scriptures than we might opt to want to think. And I think for me, this is what the last 5 years of the podcast has then been all about, right? And maybe that's kind of the confession, because at times in the podcast in particular, I come down pretty heavy on evangelical Christianity, and people are like, dude, why are you such a downer? Why are you so critical? Why are you so against your own people? And I a lot of this has been literally percolating for 15 years in my mind. And I think in the last several years, I've watched an escalation of what I consider to be the problem. And so there was always an undercurrent, I think, of what was driving the podcast was much more of a prophetic voice. And I don't mean prophetic like see the future. I mean like holding up the signs that say, hey, you guys, we may be missing something really substantial and the risk is really great and we don't even realize it. And so I think this gives probably the energy that has been true to the podcast for a number of years now. And so maybe a little bit of this is just another layer of clarification, right? I'm going to start, though, with what I think is part of the challenge. And I think this is the challenge for all Christians. And that is when we read our Bibles through lenses that have been handed to us, right? And so if we're Protestant, there's a lens. If we're evangelical Protestant, there's a lens. If we're more on the fundamentalist side of that, there's a lens. If you're on the liberal side of Protestantism, there's a lens. And in that side, if it's liberal Methodist, there's a lens. If it's liberal Lutheran, there's a lens, you know? So we all are handed lenses, frankly, before we're handed the skills of really critically reading the Bible and really thinking about it and asking questions of what we're reading. We are endowed with a bunch of lenses. We call those doctrines or perspectives on reading it. And then we can't help but read it through those lenses. It's like we're not intending to do it that way. We just tend to do it that way. And I think in the Protestant evangelical space that I inhabit, I'm a part of that system. And this podcast really just speaks to that crowd. I'm not really trying to speak to liberal Christians. I'm not really trying to speak to disbelievers. Feel free to listen in if you like. It's not like that. But I care about my tribe, my clan of evangelical American Christianity. I'm speaking to that, right? And what I find in this, and this is where I'm going to sound a little critical of something, and I am, I think, being critical of it, but I'm not trying to be cold about it. For example, in my world, I have 2 seminary degrees. So I have one that has an emphasis in philosophy and apologetics. I have another one that is an emphasis in organizational leadership, but you have to do a bunch of theology courses before you can do the organizational leadership side of it. And so I have 2 master's degrees, both from American evangelical seminaries. And what seminary does well is they go, the Bible's really complicated, and we're going to be training you so you can go lead the laity in local churches. And so we're going to give you the tools to take the complexity, create simplicity, and you can teach from that simplicity. So the way that's done then is we say, you know what? When you read the Bible stem to stern, there's a lot of question marks. There's a lot of strange world there and language and all this stuff. So we want to make it simple by systematizing it. So we create like systematic theologies or doctrines. And so here's the doctrine of God, here's the doctrine of Christ, here's the doctrine of the Holy Spirit, here's the doctrine of the kingdom, of the gospel, of sin, of salvation, of heaven, of hell. You know, we create these buckets. And then we go, what are the verses that kind of support each of these buckets? But depending on the heritage, the bucket is kind of first defined by humans, and then they find the verses that support the bucket. Now, they would say, no. We developed the buckets from what the scriptures say. But if that was the case, then all the Christian traditions would have the same buckets, and they would word the buckets in the same way, and they'd all agree on the content of the buckets and the verses that go into the buckets. But that's not quite how it works. And so the Orthodox Church, its buckets look different than the Catholic Church, which looks different than the Protestant Church. And then in the Protestant vein, it depends on if you're Calvinistic, you're Arminian, you're charismatic, you're cessationist, whatever else. We're all defining the buckets a little differently. But in the American evangelical seminary system, the buckets are pretty predictable, right? And so we create these buckets and we train people to become pastors in churches who then are going to go into those churches and they're going to teach from those buckets. And this isn't a bad thing or a wrong thing. I'm not saying that is the wrong methodology to utilize here. That's really not at all my heart, but it's to acknowledge that we're reading through lenses of the information that are in these buckets. What gets lost in that sometimes in training in seminary environments is seminaries in the kind of master's level and below, they train well to the buckets. They don't train as well to like actual critical scriptural interpretation. Like you take a couple of hermeneutic classes, you take Greek, you might take Hebrew and almost pass it. Whatever else, especially if you're getting like an MDiv, you're going to have to do languages a little bit in there, which is fantastic. And you're going to learn hermeneutics, which is the fancy word for biblical interpretation. But really, even that gets trained through the buckets, right? So it's not so much like, hey, how do you read the text critically as unencumbered by presupposition as much as possible? How do you ask questions of the text as you're reading it? Like, you're not really immersed in that as much. At best, it's a couple of classes in a whole sea of classes. But the rest of the classes, a lot of them are about theology and doctrine and things like that. One of the great travesties is they don't ever teach a class on how to deal with budgets and division in your board and people that leave your church. And like the stuff that pastors really face a lot, they almost never train to, which is kind of tragic. But what seminary does well is doctrine, right? That's what they do well, the buckets of doctrine. But the downside is almost like once you've thrown the verses in the buckets, you just don't think about it again. You don't consider it again. And so then you just have a presupposition that every time I see that word, it goes in that bucket. And that's what that bucket means every time. And I'm not going to ask any other questions of what's going on. I'm just going to make this, that says that means this, and then we move on. And then when somebody comes and says, well, wait a minute though, maybe we threw an idea in that bucket, but it really should go in a different bucket. And we've just been reading over the top of it because we had assumptions that it always means this, but really it means that, or it's always to this group, but it's in fact to that group. Should we at least think seriously about that, right? But see, that's the tricky part maybe in all of this, right? I say all of that because one of the things I find maybe within our Protestant tradition is there's this attitude that says because we're saved by grace, because it's not by works, even though, hey, if you're saved, you're going to have fruits and works, but because we're saved by grace and not by works and not by the fruits of our labors or whatever else, once I'm in, I'm good. And once I'm in, I'm good. And I can earn more reward, sure. But when I fail, I don't have to worry about any, quote, loss, right? It's like if I'm a terrible but really saved Christian, I still get in. There's no big deal. I just miss out on maybe a bigger room in the mansion. Or I miss out on a bigger vineyard in the new earth or something like that. We kind of just look and go, I can earn more, but I'm not going to ever actually suffer in any way, any kind of, quote, loss, or I'm not going to have to face any criticism, except at best maybe an initial, you didn't do well, now go into heaven, and then eventually go into the new earth. Like maybe that's kind of how it gets a little bit played because, hey, man, the Catholics were the one that were always worrying about other judgment, but we're Protestants, and we just, that's not a worry, right? Now, I want to be clear with where I'm about to go. What I'm not trying to get into here is understanding the metaphysics of the afterlife as it pertains to how Christians need to face sin or shortcoming. Because that's the other thing. As Protestants, we go, oh man, Jesus took all my sins. And so there's nothing for me to account for, like in the end. Because Jesus paid for all my failures. And so there's nothing for me to account for. I can earn reward, but I don't have to explain or deal with or face anything for my failure. I can only get reward for my successes. And I don't mean mine. I mean, in Christ, where he succeeded in me, there's reward, but there's no facing anything negative for my bad behaviors or my un-Christ-like nature or whatever, or not nature, my un-Christ-like actions or attitudes. Like there's nothing to really account for on that side. What I would actually say, though, is that when you read through the Gospels in particular, when you read through Jesus, right, and I'm going to ground this a lot in Jesus, he doesn't quite say it that way. In fact, he says it quite differently. And here's what I'm going to say as we move forward. Don't take my word for this. I literally hope and plead and want people to go open their eyes and read eyes wide open without all the lenses, just reading what it says and wrestling with what it says, asking questions of what it says. As I'm doing this today, I'm not giving a bunch of answers. I'm going to be raising probably a lot of questions. And it's probably going to feel very weird in the end that you go, well, why didn't he resolve it and explain it and show how all the pieces fit together? And I go, I think like the prophets, sometimes they just put the things out there and they didn't try to make all the pieces locked together so that people went, all I know for sure is that this is serious. and I need to do life differently in light of the seriousness of this. I don't know how it all works. I just know it's serious, and I want to take it serious and do what then God calls me to do. That's kind of the heart that I have behind all of this, right? Because on Sunday, I mentioned the 7 churches of the book of Revelation. And of the 7 churches, 5 are falling down on the job. And they are across the spectrum. You got the church of Ephesus that has right doctrine, right deeds, but no love. And Jesus says, I'm going to pull my lampstand from you. Which the best way I could put that is it's just like, I'm going to leave you to do it on your own strength, right? Which just reminds us that being good people with good doctrine does not mean that we are pleasing in Christ's sight, right? This is the last work of the New Testament. So the closing word is, just because you're my church and you're saved doesn't mean I'm super thrilled with you right now. And so he's warning now, I'm just going to remove my lampstand, my blessing from your church. You get the last church, it's the church of the Laodiceans, and they think, because they're affluent and everything is going great, that they're good in God's sight. And he says, no, don't you realize you're poor, you're miserable, you're blind, you're naked, and I'm not really in your church right now. Like, you're doing things in my name, you gather in my name, you're doing the Christian thing in my name. He goes, but I'm actually outside standing at the door knocking, which, by the way, that standing at the door knocking is knocking on the door of a church that isn't pleasing Jesus at that point. It is not knocking on the door of an unsaved human heart, and Jesus wants to come into their life. That's not the context. That's not the text. That's not the idea. He's knocking on the door of a church that is not doing what he wants. And so he's like, I'm going to remove my lampstand from you. And then in the middle, you have like Thyatira, that are basically, they got a lot of promiscuity. They're doing a lot of crazy stuff in the church. They're really, really reckless. And he's like, and I'm going to remove my lampstand from you because you're not doing what I think you should do. So there's kind of like the kind of legalistic church. There's the licentious church. There is the luxury church. And he's like warning them all, I'm going to pull my lampstand if things don't change. So Jesus doesn't, quote, mince words when it comes to his people not living according to what he's called them to live according to, right? So all of that is kind of in there to go like, hey, then this may be kind of a serious thing. Now, where I want to kind of take this a little bit is I mentioned out of the Gospel of Luke. I think it's 12 or 15. I'm sorry, right off the top of my head, because this is free form. But it's that idea of saying, hey, to much is given, much is required. So one of the great things about post-production is that I can go back in and add that thing that I was trying to refer to that on the top of my head I couldn't get spit out. And so the passage is out of Luke chapter 12, verses 47 to 49. So if you're listening, this is just a voiceover. If you're watching, you're like, oh, Matt's head is paused right there. What are we doing? It's just so I can add this in. So it's the passage that says, a servant who knows what the master wants, but isn't prepared or doesn't carry out those instructions will be severely punished. Other versions say severely beaten, right? That's a serious warning. But someone who does not know and then does something wrong will only be punished lightly. When someone has been given much, much will be required in return. And when someone has been entrusted with much, even more will be required. As I'm going to go on to say, hey, that's for the people of God. And so that's the passage I was thinking about. Wanted to add that in really quick just because I'm like, hey, man, if I throw it, it's either chapter 12 or chapter 15, and I'm just running loose. No, I want to be reading to you the passages as much as possible. So I just want to put that in here. Now we're going to continue on with the podcast, right? And he's saying it to his people, right? So he's telling his followers, disciples, I'm going to use our vernacular of saved people. He's telling saved people, if you've been given much, much is expected. And if you don't do what I've instructed you to do, don't you think there's going to be a more severe punishment for you than the ignorant people who don't realize and thus don't do? Like, really, there was so much strong terminology that he has there that he's kind of saying, like, because I have given you insight into how to live, and you've said you believe me, trust me, have faith in me, and you follow me, if you're really going to have faith in me and follow me, then you're going to do what I've asked you to do. And if you don't, you're more sinful in essence. You're more disobedient than the ignorant people who are, again, going against the law of God based on the conscience, but they're doing it kind of ignorantly. And he's like, I kind of hold them accountable less than I hold my own people accountable to doing what I say, right? That's kind of the spirit of it. Some of this reminds me of the Sermon on the Mount, right? Like the way the Sermon on the Mount flows is it starts off with the Beatitudes, and we're going to roll back into this in a second, but starts in the Beatitudes and then immediately goes into, hey, here here's what you guys are. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. You're a city on a hill. So that you live in such a way that people see your good works and they give glory to God in heaven. That descriptor there is saying, who I'm talking to are saved people. The Sermon on the Mount is not for unsaved people. It's not for disbelievers. It's not for non-Christians. I think they can get saved through it, but I go, it's not to that group. It is toward those who are light, salt, and a city on a hill. Those are descriptions of saved people. And they hail back to the Old Testament where Israel is to be a light to the Gentiles. You see that in Isaiah. They are opting to not do that repeatedly. So now Jesus is starting up a church that spreads a kingdom that's light to the world. So he's talking to his own. And then he lays out, and this is how we do it. These are my priorities, which is kind of all the way through 5, 6, and 7. And then he gets to 7, and he gives these 3 warnings of conclusion. And he's talking about a good tree and a bad tree. And he talks about those who say, Lord, Lord. And he talks about how a house can be constructed. You know, there's all these really great things. But in particular, I'm going to land on that one where he's like, they say to me, Lord, Lord, look what we did in your name. So they're calling Jesus Lord, which means they identify as Christians. And I'm not ready to say they're not necessarily, but they identify as Christians. And they said, look what we've done. We've prophesied in your name. We've done signs and wonders in your name. We've cast out demons in your name. I want you to notice those 3 things. 2 of those for sure require supernatural power of the Holy Spirit to accomplish, right? So if you're doing signs and wonders in the name of Jesus, right? And you are casting out demons and taking on darkness in the name of Jesus. Even Jesus says in Matthew 12, Satan can't cast out Satan. Demons don't go up against other demons. That's not how this works. That's silly to think that a kingdom divided against itself can stand. So if they're casting out demons in Jesus' name, it means it's somehow God's divine power. If they're prophesying, it means they're teaching the truth in Jesus' name. And then, of course, signs and wonders, you get it, right? But then he says, depart from me, I never knew you. And the sobering thing there is it's after he's given this whole sermon and he's like, you guys did stuff, but it's not the stuff I asked you to do. I asked you to reconcile with your brother when things were broken. I asked you to keep your mind pure if you're a married man and you are lusting over women because that's exploitation. I'm holding you accountable if you pursued divorce for selfish means and selfish reasons. I'm holding you accountable if you didn't keep your word. I'm holding you accountable if you didn't practice non-retaliation. I'm holding you accountable if you didn't love your enemy. I'm holding you accountable if you didn't give to the poor. Holding you accountable when it comes to how you fast and your motivations. Holding you accountable when it comes to prayer. If you love money or you love me, if you judged or you didn't judge in a healthy way. If you didn't ask and seek and knock to really live this out, if you didn't exercise the golden rule, like he loads all that up and he's like, this is the map to changing the world and being my follower, and my followers do this thing. And therefore, if you sacrificed that, but you were preaching truth, you were doing miracles, you're driving back the all the forces of darkness, but you didn't do the Sermon on the Mount, you're not doing what I said, right? Like that's kind of the spirit behind this whole thing. So it's this really sober warning. Like his priority may not be the priorities always of religion. His priority may not be the priorities that are handed to us in our Protestant evangelical tradition. And we need to make sure above all else that we go, then I want to know his priority, and I want to know where and how he warns when we don't fulfill that priority. And again, while I'm going to say I don't know the full implication of what it means, I just know that he says some really sharp stuff, and we don't want to treat that lightly. Or to look at the disbelieving world and go, the worst is in store for you, when Jesus warns us of some things that somehow can be in store for us when we claim him, but we don't live like him or for him, but we still go, but it's all in the name of him. Like that kind of stuff. So this is what I'm saying. It's a sober thing. Like for me, this is a sober thing. Doing this podcast, I admit, I'm with fear and trepidation, and I'm trying to remember, because in Matthew 10, we're going to look at this in a minute. I don't want to fear men who can simply destroy my body, right? I want to fear God who can destroy body and soul in hell. We're going to get into that, right? And who he says that to. But I go, okay, so even this, I go, man, I can get some blowback. I can get some people going, you're nuts or whatever else. And so I'm like, I don't want to do this. Unfortunately, my conscience is bound to this. Unfortunately, I think the scriptures speak painfully clear to this, and we just tend to obscure it because we've got these lenses and we form these buckets and we kind of approach things in a certain way, and we don't just kind of read the text as it sits and face the uncomfortable things that it states as it sits. And then at least the most I would ever want out of this is that at least it makes us ask questions and wrestle, which is why I'm not drawing a bunch of conclusions in this, but I'm trying to get the lights on our dash to flash. All right. So that's kind of what it comes down to. So with that, here is the sticky part of the whole thing now. So if you look at the buckets again, I said there's all these different buckets, and one of the buckets that we're handed has the label hell on the bucket, right? And so under that label of hell, we take a bunch of verses and we throw it into the bucket. And we go, this is our doctrine on hell. And from that, we fundamentally go, everything that pertains to that bucket pertains to disbelievers, right? So whether it's outer darkness, weeping and gnashing of teeth, the abyss, the lake of fire, the word hell in the Bible, which is the Greek word Gehenna, we throw it all into the bucket that's labeled hell, and we go, everything that pertains to all of those things goes in that one bucket. What I'm going to do right now is kind of dump out the bucket and just deal with that word hell and that bucket hell. Listen really closely to me right now. I'm just going to deal with the word hell as appears in the Bible, that word that is translated from the word Gehenna. I'm going to deal with just that word. Who that word is spoken to, what that word is spoken about, and that doesn't have anything to do with all the other descriptors that I would maybe put in a different bucket and say the other bucket might be judgment for eternity, what might be faced in the afterlife for those who don't believe, those who don't follow, those who don't bow their knee to Jesus, all those other descriptors. I'm just going to put in another bucket for now. Let's call it everlasting destruction, or let's call it weeping and gnashing of teeth, or let's call it outer darkness, or let's call it any of those other things. Let's call it the lake of fire bucket, right? Put all of that in that bucket, but the word hell, Gehenna bucket, I'm just talking about that bucket. And I'm going to walk through literally every passage in the entire Bible that refers to that word hell, Gehenna, that bucket. And then as we do it, just asking the question of who's that bucket talking to as we look at the bucket, right? I say all of that because I have no doubt some people are going to walk away from this and go, oh, so Matt doesn't believe X, Y, or Z, or Matt's trying to challenge X, Y, or Z. I'm honestly trying to take the Bible seriously. I'm trying to take Jesus seriously, like boldly, freakishly, soberly, seriously. And if I don't do that, this is why James says, don't let many of you become teachers knowing you're going to incur stricter judgment. This was part of my heart going, I believe there is stricter judgment for the teacher, which is why I'm going to teach something that's going to be so utterly uncomfortable for those of us who are trying to wrestle with these things, right? So I want you to kind of get that locked in. Now, with that, I'm going to give you a quick little pop quiz to see if you can kind of think about this in your mind. When you think about that word hell, just the word hell, again, not all the other descriptors that might be dealing with afterlife matters, that word hell, my first question is, like, how often do you think that word comes up in the entire scripture? Like, just in your own head right now, you can start thinking about, that's probably this many times, right? That's the first question. The second question is, what writers of the Bible would you naturally assumed probably use that word, right? It would have been in their vernacular. They certainly would probably talk about those things, like which writers of the scriptures would refer to that particular word. And then third, when you think about that word, who is that warning to? Right? When you think about that word, because this is the predominant word we use for like afterlife judgment. So that particular word, who is it used in regard to when you think about it just off the cuff? You're not cracking your Bible or anything else. And again, I'm just talking about the word hell right now. I'm going to repeat. I'm not talking about outer darkness. I'm not talking about, everlasting destruction. I'm not talking about lake of fire. Again, I'm putting all of that in another bucket right now. Just hell. Okay. I'll give you some answers. of the 66 books of the Protestant Bible. Catholics have a bigger Bible. Eastern Orthodox has an even bigger Bible. But of the 66 books of the Protestant Bible, you will never once find the word hell, or technically, if it's used kind of as the word hell in the Old Testament. You're going to find something called the Valley of Hinnom, which is where Gehenna gets its name, the Greek word in the New Testament. So you're going to find the Valley of Hinnom come up a lot, and I think that's going to tip us off to some things in the New Testament. But when you read through the entire Old Testament, you never see the word hell. You just don't see it. Now, in the New Testament, here's what's fascinating. You will never find the word hell in the Gospel of John. You will never find the word hell in the Acts of the Apostles. You never find a single time where Paul ever used the word hell. Peter never used the word hell. Hebrews never uses the word hell. Jude never used the word hell. 1st, 2nd, 3rd John never used the word hell. And the book of Revelation never used the word hell, Gehenna. Right? So right now you might be like, oh, no, what's he going after? I'm just pointing out that we really use this word a lot in a lot of ways. And I think our natural assumption is all those things I just listed, it must be there. Right? Certainly Paul, certainly Revelation. Now, and those guys, are there those things in the other bucket? Yes, they are. I'm not trying to take away from that. So I want to keep clarifying that because, again, I just know there's going to be like some soundbitey thing from this. You go, well, you said this, right? Those writers had other descriptors for all the stuff in that other bucket, but they don't use the word Gehenna or hell in any of their writing, right? So the Gospel of John, all the way through to Revelation, the word hell is never used but once. But once. And that writer is James. And when James writes about it, it's in chapter 3. And he talks about our tongues. So he's talking to Christians about how Christians speak to other people. And that our tongues can be really destructive or they can bless and everything else. And he just says, man, our tongues are set on fire by Gehenna, hell itself, right? So in that sense, when you look at James, it's hard to go like, oh, that's a location or a place, as much as it's kind of like an illustrative euphemism of the whatever that word entails somehow drives our speech. But it's a warning to Christians that, hey, you are kind of like speaking hell into the world when you speak in ways that are not blessing, in ways that are cursing, in ways that are crass or critical or unchristlike or judgmental, whatever it is. Like James gets into a lot of stuff, especially about inequality between the rich and the poor, things of that nature. And so it's just a reminder that, hey, my words unleash hell in the world. My words can be unlocked from this Gehenna thing. And therefore, it makes it serious. Like watching what we say, what we write, what we post, what we utter into the private with other people is like a serious thing, right? Should put it on the radar. That's a serious thing, right? So outside of 3 other books of the entire scripture, hell only comes up in James chapter 3, right? Gehenna comes up only in James chapter 3. Of the other 3 works, it's Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And of those 3, the word hell occurs 11 times. So in the entire 66 books of the Protestant canon, the word hell appears 12 times. If anything, at least I hope you go like, wow, I just didn't know that. Now, what am I going to say again? There's other descriptors, other words in a different bucket, but I want to keep this in the what does the Bible say about hell bucket? And who does it say it to? Good news is I'm going to walk you through every occurrence in the Gospels, right? So I got a whole great little list here to walk us through, right? So the first thing you need to know is that the word Gehenna does have its roots in the Hebrew scriptures. So it is literally the valley of the son of Hinnom, and it comes up in 2 Kings, it comes up in 2 Chronicles, it comes up in Jeremiah. And that valley is just outside of the city wall of Jerusalem. It runs kind of southwest of the city. And it was the place where Israel, when it would fall into worshiping idols and all of this stuff, it became sort of like a euphemism for God's judgment for his people being sinful. And so they would worship other gods there. There might even be human sacrifice there. And so it was this symbol of like because you've sinned against me and you've left me and you've done these terrible things and you're not being a light to the Gentiles, there's this connection to the Valley of Hinnom as a descriptor of God's judgment on God's people. That's what it is in the Old Testament. Like, I'm not making that up, right? These are his chosen people, his elect nation. He calls them his people. He calls them his kids. He calls them his family, all those things like an Amos. But they're doing terrible things. And so he's like, hey, man, the judgment of Hinnom is upon you as my people. That's the spirit of it in the Hebrew scriptures. So then we get into the Christian scriptures, right? And we go, well, where are the 11 places that Jesus brings up this word? So the first is in the Sermon on the Mount. In fact, of the 11, 3 are in the Sermon on the Mount. So again, I go back to what I said earlier. Who's the Sermon on the Mount to? It's to Christians. How do we know it's to Christians? Because as soon as he gives the Beatitudes, he tells them who they are. He says, you are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. You are a city on a hill. Remember the grammar on this one. The subject is the you that is salt, light, and a city on a hill. And so we're supposed to have these good works that people can see and that can glorify God. Those are not descriptors of maybe saved people, make-believer people. Jesus is like saying, this is what you are. You are those things. From this, he says, and so your righteousness, still the same group that is the salt, the light, and the city on a hill, your righteousness needs to exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees. And that word righteous there is a Hebrew extension. It's a Greek word, but it's a Hebrew extension of doing right by God and doing right by others. So it's not Protestant positional righteousness. That is not where the Gospels take that word. They're talking about how we're righteous toward God and righteous toward people, that we have right by otherness in our actions. It's got to exceed religion. So he says that. And then he starts to just tell you how to do that. Like, here's how we are truly doing right by God and others in this world. That's the rest of the Sermon on the Mount. So these are the marching orders. And in those marching orders then, after he says, man, you have to have this righteousness that's greater than the scribes and Pharisees, otherwise you're never going to enter the kingdom of heaven. He's telling those who are salt and light and a city on a hill, take note. I'm not kidding around. This is like a big deal, right? And then he immediately starts to give 6 case studies on relationship. And so the first one, he says, you have heard it was said to those of ancient times, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment. But I say to you that if you are angry with a brother or sister, again, Christian language, brother or sister, if you are angry with a brother or sister, you who are salt, light, city on a hill that must be more righteous, you will be liable to judgment. And if you insult a brother or sister, you will be liable to the council. And if you say fool, you will be liable to the hell of fire. So the first occurrence of the warning of Gehenna is toward followers who treat other followers relationally poorly. I didn't say it. I literally am just reading it. The very first occurrence where Gehenna comes up in the entire Bible is in the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus is talking to brother, sister to sister relationships, assumingly in the faith of following Jesus. And he says, if you call your brother a fool, you're in danger of hell, right? I'm not getting into then what is that hell? This is one of those lingering questions. I'm not trying to answer it, except to go like, in their tradition, it was the Valley of Hinnom, and that was a real place outside of the city that represented God's judgment on his own people. I can say that. Beyond that, I'm not trying to answer, well, what does that mean exactly? I just go, it must be serious. Must be serious. And so from that, he goes on to say, so if you know there's a problem with the person, you got to go be reconciled to that person, right? If you've cheated them, go pay them back. Don't get drug into court where you're then stuck till you pay the last penny. Just make it right. So that's the first occurrence of the word Gehenna. The second occurrence comes up in the second instance. He says, you have heard it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Now, technically, I'm going to stop here for a second. Technically, he is talking about married men who look at other women lustfully. We turn this into everybody that looks at everybody lustfully. I think there can be other texts from Paul and things like that that can get into that. But Jesus says adultery. Adultery is a married relationship, and then you start a relationship with somebody else. That's technically adultery. That's the word he's using here. So again, just contextually, we want to remember that he's speaking very narrowly, especially since he's going to get into divorce after that. That he's talking about a married man in particular. It could be a married woman, I suppose, but certainly it's a married man that he's using as the example because they're looking at a woman lustfully. And he says, you've already committed adultery with her in your heart. And so he says, what's the recourse? He says, if your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away, because it's better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to be thrown into Gehenna, hell, right? Which for them was a valley outside the city. Just when they hear it, they're going to go, oh, the valley outside the city. At least they thought that. At best, they thought that. And that it's connected to God's judgment. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to go into hell. So now that is 3 occurrences of the word hell in the New Testament, and it is written to who? Followers of Jesus. And he's trying to get our attention that you would be better to mutilate yourself, maim yourself, than to keep that pattern going. At best, it makes us go, wow. Matter of fact, one of my favorite early Christian leaders, a guy named Origen, literally castrated himself because of this. He's like, no, it's better to do that than to face God's judgment for not being what God wants me to be. Like, that was pretty draconian. But honestly, I go, well, if you take Jesus' word seriously, that would be an understandable application of, because he literally says it. Now, I think it's hyperbole. I really do. I think it's hyperbole to get our attention. But that's maybe a little bit of the key too, right? That he's using this word Gehenna or hell because it makes every light on the dash flash, right? And he's saying it to who? People who are described as salt and light in a city on a hill. Like, that's the whole thing behind this. So those are 3 of the other 11 places, the 12th being in the book of James. The next occurrence is very particular. It's in Matthew chapter 10. And so it starts in chapter 10. It says, then Jesus summoned his 12 disciples, and he gave authority over all unclean spirits to cast them out and to cure every disease and every sickness. And he says, and these are the names of the 12 apostles. And so he goes into Simon, also known as Peter, and Andrew, and James, and John, and Philip, Bartholomew, Thomas. The whole list is there. And then he tells them, I'm sending you out. And I want you to go to communities and share my message. And if they reject you, shake the dust off and move on. If they accept you, awesome. Keep rolling, man. Right? He says that. And then what's he say to them? He says, the disciple is not above the teacher, nor a slave above the master. It is enough for the disciple to be like the teacher and the slave like the master. If they've called the master of the house Beelzebub, how much more will they malign those of his household? So have no fear of them. Who's he saying have no fear of them? He's telling the apostles. And you could say by extension, believers, but certainly the apostles, have no fear of them, right? He says, for nothing is covered that will not be uncovered, and nothing secret that will not become known in time. When I say to you, right? He says, what I say to you, the subject of the you is who? The apostles, the 12, right? What I say to you in the dark, tell in the light. And what you hear whispered, proclaim from the housetops. Do not fear those who can kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather, fear the one who can destroy both body and soul in hell. He says, and are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny, and yet not one of them falls to the ground apart from your Father's will? And even the hairs of your head are all counted. So do not be afraid. You are more valued than many sparrows. The subject is the you, which is the apostles, and the warning about hell is to who? The apostles. He's telling them, don't fear people who can simply kill your body. You apostles fear God who can destroy body and soul in hell. So the warning of Gehenna here, again, like the other warnings, are to followers of Jesus. They're to disciples, they're to apostles, right? So I hope you're starting to get this. Now, I know right now your mind's going, so I'm going to go to eternal conscious torment, hell forever because I'm a follower of Jesus, but maybe I didn't do these things. This is part of the dilemma. I go, there's maybe another bucket for that topic, right? Another bucket. I set that bucket over to the side. And in this podcast, I'm not even talking about that bucket. I'm trying to just simply go, what do the scriptures warn? And it's meant to get all the lights on the dash flashing. And it might be really sobering, but instead of us going, that's scary, it goes, it means Jesus has something he really wants me to do. And it's so important that he uses language that is sobering, right? So That is Matthew chapter 10. The next one is in Matthew chapter 18. It says, at that time, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven, right? Remember, they just had an argument. They're all talking about who's going to be the best, who's going to be at the head of the table, who's going to be sitting next to Jesus. And he's like, man, you guys don't even get it. You don't even get it. It says he called a child to whom he put among them, and he said, truly, I tell you, you disciples, unless you change and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever becomes humble like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Whoever welcomes one such as a child in my name welcomes me. And if any of you disciples, you apostles, because that's who's been arguing, if any of you causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, actually, it would even be like to stumble, to fall away from the faith. Like they were following Jesus, and then you did something because you're trying to be first instead of be last. You're trying to be greatest instead of least. You had conduct or character or behaviors that caused people to go, I don't want to follow Jesus anymore. He says, if you do that, it would be better for you if a great millstone were fastened around your neck and you were drowned in the depths of the sea. He says, woe to the world because of these things that cause sin. Such things are bound to come, but woe to the one through whom they come. And so he says, if your hand or foot causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to enter life maimed or lame than to have 2 hands and 2 feet and be thrown into the eternal fire. And if your eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. It is better for you to enter life with 1 eye than to have 2 eyes and be thrown into the hell of fire. Who is the you throughout the whole thing? The disciples. And he's warning the disciples, the Christian, the follower of Jesus, the claimer of the Christian faith, whatever language you want to use. He's like, if your conduct causes other people to stumble, sin, or leave the faith, it's better to have a millstone around your neck. It's better to start lopping off your hands and your eyes and your feet than to be cast into this valley outside the city. Whatever that entails beyond that, I don't know, right? I'm not trying to get into that. I'm just going, it must be really a big deal to Jesus to keep saying to his people, here's what you need to be concerned about, right? Now, I'm gonna skip the final 2 out of Matthew chapter 25 because I just want to roll back to the remainders. There's 3 in Mark, 1 in Luke. And it's just because they're going to be somewhat familiar, right? So in Mark chapter 9, hell comes up 3 times. And it's all really tight from verse 33 to 45. And it's really just a reiteration of what we just saw in Matthew 18, right? And so, again, they're arguing about who's going to be the greatest in verse 33. And they came to Capernaum, and then they were in the house, and he asked them, why were you arguing on the way? But they were silent because they knew that they were arguing about who's kicking the most butt for Jesus. And he's like, you're idiots. And so he sat down, called the 12, and he said to them, whoever wants to be first must be the least of all and the servant of everybody, right? That's kind of the spirit. And then John says to him, teacher, we're doing stuff and we're engaged in all these different things. And then there's other people that aren't really of your namesake to us, and they're doing things too. And what do you want us to do about all of that? That's kind of the spirit. And then he kind of just says, you know what? Don't stop those people, for no one who does a deed of power in my name will be able to soon afterwards speak evil of me. He says, for whoever is not against us is for us. Who's the us? Jesus and his disciples, his apostles, right? That's the us. The subject is still the disciples and the apostles here. He says, for truly I tell you, whoever gives you a cup of water to drink because you bear the name of Christ, because you bear the name of Christ, will no means lose their reward. And if any of you causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for you if a great millstone were hung around your neck and you were thrown into the sea. And again, he says, if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. It's better for you to enter life maimed than to have 2 hands and go into hell, the unquenchable fire. If your foot causes you sin, cut it off. It's better for that than to be thrown into the hell of fire, right? And it comes up one more time in there. So he's like, this is the thing, right? And who's it to again? It's still to his disciples, his followers, his apostles, his people, that word is being used, right? It's pretty wild that way. It's just pretty wild that way. Kind of looking at one other thing. Luke chapter 12. So it says, meanwhile, while the crowds had gathered by the thousands, so they trampled one another, he began to speak first to his disciples. says, beware of the yeast of the Pharisees, that is their hypocrisy. Hypocrisy may be a big deal. Nothing is covered up that will not be uncovered, and nothing secret that will not become known. Therefore, whatever you have said in the dark will be heard in the light. So this is just Matthew chapter 10 again, really. And what you've whispered behind closed doors will be claimed on the housetops. I tell you, my friends. So again, when we hear this word, we go, oh, Jesus keeps talking about hell to the apostles and disciples. Well, it's not like he's not like, I'm mad at you. They're his friends. He says, so I tell you, my friends, do not fear those who can kill the body, but after cannot do anything else. I will show you whom to fear. Fear the one who after killing has the authority to cast into hell. Yes, I tell you, fear that one. Who is the warning to hell about there? He's warning his disciples. He's warning his apostles. That's who he's warning. He's like, don't fear people. Fear God who can do this thing. Right? Now, like I said, there was two other occurrences, and I just wanted to roll back to him just because of the context is slightly different. It's in Matthew chapter 23, and he's speaking to the Pharisees this time, the scribes and Pharisees. And he says, woe to you, you scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites, which is interesting because that's what he just talked about, the hypocrisy thing. You say one thing, but do another thing. You claim one thing, but you act in another way. That's like a big deal. So he says to the scribes and Pharisees, which by the way, were what? The leaders of the nation of Israel. And the nation of Israel is what? God's chosen people. So as Jesus shows up, that's why he first goes to the house of the nation of Israel, because they're God's people, right? And so he's saying to the leaders of God's people, he says, man, you scribes, you Pharisees, you're hypocrites, for you lock people out of the kingdom of heaven, for you do not go in yourselves. And when others are going in, you stop them. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you cross sea and land to make a single convert, and you make the new convert twice as much what? A child of hell as yourselves. Right? He goes on to then say also again, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, you build the tombs of the prophets and decorate the graves of the righteous. And they're talking about, oh man, we would have never wiped out the prophets in our day like they did in their day because we're godlier and wiser and all that. And he says, no, you guys are snakes, a brood of vipers. How can you escape the judgment of hell? For this reason, I send you prophets and scribes and sages, and then you just kill them, wipe them out and everything else. And so all of this is going to come on you, this generation. Again, of the total of 12 instances of this word being used, 10 are 100% to Christians, apostles, or disciples, right? 10 for sure. Like, just the context demands it, right? It's a word that never is coming up in those 10 instances. It's never coming up as because you don't believe in Jesus. This is the warning for you. Different bucket, other descriptors. Going to say it for the 15th time. That's a conversation to be had, right? This bucket with that word hell on the front is repeatedly to the apostles, to the disciples, and James related somehow to New Testament Christians. And then of the two occurrences toward the Pharisees, again, it just highlights the fact that it's not to the crowds. It's not to a woman at a well. It's not to a prostitute that rolls along. It's not to a guy that's demon-possessed on the other side of the lake. It is toward those who believe in the God of the Bible, study the word of the Bible, represent the people of God throughout the Bible. And he's like, you all are not doing what God wanted you to do. You continue to make the same mistakes as Israel throughout history, and now this generation will be the close of this, right? I dealt with the northern kingdom. I dealt with the southern kingdom. The southern kingdom came back. Eventually, it becomes this generation, and he's like, you're still not getting it. And so because of that, there's going to be an end to all of that because, again, you're in trouble with me, right? Bible lesson over. I hope you're not reeling at this point. We're almost an hour in, and I hope you're not reeling at this point because my heart is not for people to go, do I have assurance of salvation? Am I really a Christian? I mean, the apostles, like, I guess you could say outside of Judas, the other 11 were legit, and as Jesus is saying it to legit people, and as he gives the Sermon on the Mount, he's giving it to conceivably legit people, because he's like, this is what you are. You are the light of the world. It's not you're maybe the light of the world, or you could be the light of the world. He's like, you are that position, right? That is the place that you hold. Because of that, I want you to realize that I've called you to do a thing, and it's so serious and monumental. I want there to be this pressure that says, don't take it lightly. That's why I go back to what I said out of Luke, that the expectation is not lower on the Christian. The expectation is higher on the Christian. Because when we went like, I want to follow Jesus, I need Jesus. He came, he lived, he died, he rose, he ascended for me, and I want to follow him. We got to remember what that invitation was. It wasn't just like, oh, I'm going to believe a set of facts and then I'm good to go. And while I could earn more reward, I will never have to worry about him being like severe with me in any way. And I go, Jesus actually said something very different. He's like, oh, you're following me. It's going to cost. It costs. That's why he says, hey man, you got to lose your life to gain it. You got to, deny yourself, take up your cross daily and follow me. Taking up your cross is dying daily. Deny yourself is a hard thing. Living the Sermon on the Mount, the map that he outlines is like, this is the way you live, is a terribly hard thing to do outside of A, the Spirit is driving it. B, you actually believe that it changes the world and you take it seriously. And you believe that is the only best map to God reclaiming all things, which is what he gave to us so that his will will be done on earth as it is in heaven. You can tell in my voice, I'm a bit passionate about this, right? And so if I now round it back to the beginning and maybe to modernize it, I go, because I shared on Sunday when I did Amos, had this like really deep burden. I was really weighed down. And this is kind of the essence of how I was weighed down. When I look at the American evangelical Christian landscape, I kind of go, it's much easier to, or at least what gets a lot of press, right, is what I would say Christians behaving badly. And I'm not trying to say it's all Christians or it's all churches or it's all evangelicals or whatever it is. But there's enough of a portion where when I overlay the Sermon on the Mount over what I see within kind of our American Christian space, I go, I think we should be sobered by Jesus's warnings. I really do, right? I think even on Sunday in Amos, I actually cross-pollinated over into Matthew chapter 25, where you have two groups that are standing before the throne, and they both claim Jesus is Lord. I mean, it says Lord and Lord in both categories, the sheep and the goats. They both claim Jesus is Lord, but one just didn't do what Jesus wanted them to do, and the other did do what Jesus wanted them to do. And when you read the list of what he is giving as either praise or indictment, I would say probably most of us, myself included, as American evangelical Christians, have not done most of those things. And we read it and we go, oh, yeah, that's really... And then we just like roll past, It's like, again, I kind of said it on Sunday, like how many of us have gone to prison and visited people? How many of us have literally gone to downtown Seattle and fed the poor or clothed the naked? How many of us have brought strangers into our homes? I just found myself like almost dumbfounded. Like we kind of emphasize things that are good, like go to church, read your Bible, give, be moral. Like those aren't bad things. But when I kind of look and I go, what were the things that Jesus said to do? They're much harder things. Like the Sermon on the Mount is really, really challenging. Like he says, hey, do not judge lest you be judged. But honestly, one of the great indictments against American evangelicalism is we're judgmental. And it's a very hard argument for me to say we're not. Like when people go, oh, Christians are so judgmental. I can't be like, no, man, that's just a couple of them. The majority are not. No, I'm judgmental. And I like to think I'm not, and so that's a serious thing for me. Like that's my problem that I do. Right. And so it's like, or any of the other things in the Sermon on the Mount, like to really love your enemies. I think we're perceived as really hating our enemies, like our cultural enemies. It's like if they're liberal or woke or of the pride community or whatever else, those groups all go, Christians hate us, man, right? They don't love their enemies. They don't do good to, pray for, and bless. Because that's what Jesus says. Do good to, pray for, and bless your enemies. I think we tend to look and go, oh no, for the sake of cultural warfare, we have to kind of verbally and openly oppose these people that are estranged from God and do life based on that, right? But I always go back to that Romans 1 versus Romans 2. Like Romans 1 is like, hey, here's what the unsaved world does. And he says to that grouping, he says, because of these things, the wrath of God is revealed against all unrighteousness, right? Totally true. You get to chapter 2 and he's like, oh, but you who claim God and you claim the Bible, right? Those who say we're God's people, but you don't live in God's ways. You forget that God's kindness and tolerance is designed to turn us from our sins, right? We forget that. Instead, we judge lost people more than we love lost people. And there he speaks of wrath again. But there he doubles down. He says, those people, the wrath of God is currently revealed. But for you, you're storing up wrath for the day of wrath. Like, right? And then he goes in chapter 3 and says, everybody's sinful. And therefore the solution is Jesus in chapter 4 and 5, right? Now, again, I'm not trying to get into the eternal implication of these warnings to Christians. I'm just simply saying that there is a lot of warnings to Christians for which I think at least we go, I need to take notice. And then I need to really focus on what Jesus says is the priority. And I want to make that my priority too. Because we're going to see this even in Hosea this week. Israel never just abandoned Yahweh. They just said Yahweh plus other things, right? Instead of it just Yahweh, it was Yahweh plus other things. And I think in the same way we can go Christ or Jesus plus other loyalties. They may be partisan loyalties, they may be financial loyalties, they may be social loyalties, they may be tribal loyalties, whatever it is. But we buckle those together. And then sometimes in the spirit of the loyalty, we override what Jesus is calling us to do, right? We're overriding, calling out the hypocrisy that we see. We're overriding, pursuing the justice that he calls us to pursue. We're overriding the loving of an enemy. We're overriding the turning of a cheek or going the extra mile. We're overriding keeping our word. We're overriding protecting our mind. We're overriding giving. We're overriding fasting. We're overriding praying and what the prayer actually says. And even the warnings in the prayer, especially at the end about, hey, if you don't forgive, you're not going to be forgiven. Like we go, no, I'm forgiven, so it doesn't matter if I forgive. No, Jesus just said that. He just puts it there again in this awkward, uncomfortable way. And we go, man, I got to take that really seriously. Like that's the point. And so I think for me, because I am a huge, huge fan of the Gospels, particularly I'm a synoptic Gospels guy, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And when I read that, and I admit, I will give you a bias. I'm going to tell you a bias right now. When I look at the entirety of the scriptures, I see it as like a mountain. So the Hebrew scriptures go up to the peak. The peak is the Gospels, and it comes down the other side, which is Acts and the epistles, right? The anomaly might be Revelation, because Revelation, if you have a red letter edition, the first couple of chapters are red letters. It's like the epistles of Jesus, right? They're red letters. It's Jesus speaking. And what's he doing there? He's warning 5 churches that he's going to remove their blessing, and he's praising 2 churches for being faithful. Speaking again to Christians, right? Speaking to his church. I think that's important. I do. And my goal in this podcast today, again, is not to create anxiety. I hope you didn't punch out at this point. It's not to create anxiety. It's not to create scandal. It's not to even say, oh, let's have a big debate on the word Gehenna. Like I said, I just literally, like one of the most shocking things I ever did in my life years ago was did that little exercise, right? Because again, that word gets applied to this is the fate of disbelievers unless they believe in Jesus. Different bucket, different descriptors may in fact be dealing with those things. This Gehenna word, it's for the people of God to get their attention, to say this is a really serious thing to God. If you travel down roads of, oh, so does that mean we can lose our salvation? Again, I think that's a little bit of an adventure in missing the point, like a little bit. And I'm just saying because, again, how the Valley of Hinnom had linkage to God's judgment on God's people based on this valley outside the city that had a reputation. I think it's way more about the warning to God's people of you're in a really bad space if we're using that word. And you want to course correct, right? But I think it's fascinating that when Jesus then uses that word, it is always, except for maybe the 2 occurrences with the Pharisees, but again, that's related to people that claim God, claim the Bible, claim to be the people of God. not doing what the people of God should do. But the other occurrence is it's grounded in some pretty wild things. Like, if you see your fellow Christian in a negative light and you're like, they're a fool, and you won't reconcile with them, you just refuse to. He's like, that's problematic. If you don't take real serious steps as a married man to protect your mind from basically objectifying women, which then is disrespectful to the image of God in them, I think at the core of that, it's probably less about just pure lustful sexuality, and it's way more about you're just making them an object of your desire, and that is a direct offense and assault to the image of God that resides in them. Like, if we're not taking that seriously, he warns twice, you're better off to start lopping stuff off, right? So again, he's just like, I'm trying to let you know this is a really serious thing, right? That was the 3 occurrences. Then when he tells the apostles, don't be afraid of people. Don't be afraid of people. Be willing to go and share. And then in Matthew 18, and please don't cause people to leave the faith. Don't do things that are hypocritical and sinful, and either people don't want the faith because of what you do, or they leave the faith because of what you as my followers do. That one particularly, because then he's repeating it again in Mark and Luke. Those are the overlappers at that point. So he says it in all 3 Gospels, that particular warning about causing others to fall away from the faith or sin because of our hypocrisy or our lack of decorum in some way, or our lack of being like Jesus. And then people go, well, Jesus isn't like that. And we're like, tough. This is what Christians do. Like that whole thing. I go, that's the seriousness of it. That's the thing. And he says that then 3 different times in the 3 different Gospels. And that racks up the majority of our usages outside of James. And it's Christians and how we speak. I look at that, and I look at the current climate today. And this is probably the core of why I was so burdened on Sunday. If you go back and listen to the Amos message, I was burdened because I'm over the last few weeks, we've been as a staff looking at the data on how many people are leaving the Christian faith, how many people are turned off to evangelical Christianity, how many people are pointing out hypocrisy and judgmentalism and inconsistency on the part of evangelicalism. A lot of that steers into a lot of things, some of which are certainly very partisan oriented. And people go, how can evangelicals back such clearly poor character, both inside the church, outside the church and politics, inside of culture, having certain cultural agendas? Why is it that it seems we care more about budgets and money and legality than we do about mercy and justice and realizing you soar up in heaven and not on earth? Like, there's all these critiques. And so people go, why would I want Jesus if his followers seem to not take him seriously? That's one of the biggest critiques. And as a church leader in evangelical space, I go, all of that is millstone behavior. It's just millstone behavior, right? And I especially think about, like, I think some people, certainly even maybe a large chunk of people, they leave Christianity because, you know what, they just want their independence. Maybe they come to the place where they're just like, I don't believe in God, or I don't believe the Bible, or you know, it's just all dumb. I've evolved past it. Now I'm an agnostic. I'm a spiritualist. I'm a whatever. Like, there's a chunk of people that leave for those reasons, right? There is another chunk of people that both leave or will not come in. Or they go, I'm accepting Jesus, but I'm never connecting to the people of God or a community of faith. I'm never going to a church. Because they look and they go, there's all of this brokenness, but cloaked in kind of a superiority. Like, we're more enlightened, we're more right, you're more sinful, you're more wrong, we've got it figured out, you don't have it figured out. And while we talk about grace, we sound like we're very judgmental. And I look at that, excuse me, and that's the heaviness that I feel. I go, oh my gosh, like what if I am doing things that is millstone behavior? What if I have done things where people go, I'm done with Christianity, I'm done with Jesus, because it's all baloney. These people have the Holy Spirit in them. They're supposed to have the fruit of the Spirit, love and joy and peace and patience and kindness, but I don't see that. They're supposed to have this transcendent ethic that puts others before themselves. This transcendent ethic is going to love their enemies. This transcendent ethic that is going to seek justice for the poor and the marginalized and the stranger, and they're going to be bringing them in and going to jail and visiting them and all this stuff. And then they look and they go, you seem to ask for a lot of money to build a lot of bigger buildings, to have a lot of cool stuff inside, so you can have a lot of cool ministries that serve you, but what are you doing for the sake of the world? Like, what are you doing for the least of these? What are you doing for the poor and the orphaned and that kind of thing? And that's not to say that things aren't happening and that there are places that are doing things and that we as a church are doing things. But we can't just go, well, those critiques are all dumb. Those are all silly critiques. And when people are saying we're leaving because we want Jesus, but we don't see him in the church, what is our comeback for that? Can we go, no, come on in. Let me show you all the ways you're going to see Jesus here. Is that what it's going to be? And when we see inconsistency on the part of those who claim Jesus in culture, if we just remain silent, then they go, you're turning a blind eye. Like, you expect more of disbelievers to behave than you expect of your own, even though Jesus had the heaviest warnings for his own, right? This is where I get some blowback because, again, I tend to look at the evangelical camp, and that's been the podcast for the last several years, is to go like, we are really good at pointing out the flaws of culture, but we're not really good at identifying the problems of our own, and the problems of our own have been really substantial. I mentioned this on Sunday. There's a website, the Roy's Report, and every week it's just all about either Christian organizations or Christian leaders or whatever behaving badly, right? Just behaving badly. And then there are well-known Christians in places of power, or at least people who are claiming Jesus in positions of power, and they highlight the offenses of the lost world, but they are silent on the offenses of those who claim Jesus in the public space. And so all the more the world looks on and they're like, oh, I see what it is. Judgment for me, but not for thee. And that's millstony. I didn't say it's millstony. Jesus said it's millstony. If any of you, right? John's listed by name in part of that. If any of you cause any of these little ones to fall away or to give into sin or step away, right? Depending on how you want to look at that, it would be better for you to have a millstone. And then he says, matter of fact, it would be better for you to start maiming yourself than to face the judgment of hell. I hope as you hear all of that you just go, clearly Jesus is saying this is something serious. It's something serious. And again, I'm not trying to advocate, so let's all engage in a bunch of works salvation now. Like that also, because this is going to be the problem, I think, in this entire podcast. People are going to be like, so what is the implication that you're saying? What is the final thing that you're stitching together? And I'm like, I don't even think the purpose of Jesus saying those things is for me to go there. I think the purpose of what Jesus is saying, because again, when he says this in one instance, he says, to my friends, here's the warning. I think he's just trying to really let us know, like, don't take this casually. Like, once you put your hand to the plow, if you look back, you're not fit for the kingdom of heaven. Like, again, that's another warning that he gives. He has a lot of warnings. I think part of the dilemma, again, in the Protestant heritage that's been handed down to us, of which I'm a Protestant, we just kind of got this notion of once I punch my ticket, it's all about, again, I can earn rewards, but I don't have to have accountability in the same kind of way. And I'm like, apparently Jesus says, no, there's a great deal of accountability. There's a great deal of accountability when we're not living like him. And the way we live like him is not all the Christianese ways that we engineer. It's whatever he said, right? It's whatever he said. That's what we're supposed to do. And if we're not, and especially if we're not, and others are getting turned off to Jesus, how heartbreaking, right? How heartbreaking. And I think sometimes the thing is, well, hey, don't judge Jesus by his people. We're going to fail you. Judge Jesus on his own merits. And the dilemma with that is twofold. One of the primary ways people know what Jesus looks like is Jesus's people. He's physically not here. He left us here, and he gave us his authority to go and do and share and disciple and everything else. So this idea of like, whoa, my hands are clean, if I'm a hypocrite, I'm inconsistent, I have the wrong priorities, and it turns people off. That's not on me. That's on them because they should look at Jesus, not me. That's kind of a cop-out, A. But B, Jesus literally said, if you all cause a little one to stumble, to sin, to fall away, to not want to follow me, it's actually on you. Like, that's the other part of it, right? And so weirdly enough, this goes back then years in the making where all of this has been in my mind and my heart and rattling around. And I'm like, this is a moment to articulate it. Like based on that thing in Amos, I'm like, this is a moment to articulate that I think there's a lot more sobriety in the words of Jesus than we may be comfortable with. Just a lot more sobriety, And while I know, again, you're going to want me to put a bow on the end of this thing and say, oh, well, so this this is what this means for the Christian. Like, what does it mean for the Christian in the afterlife? Or what does it mean for the Christian in this life to be warned of Gehenna for these bad behaviors? And I go, I don't have an answer for that. I'm not even trying to pretend I have an answer for that. Like, I have no answer for that. I'll take you to one passage really fast. This is a freebie because you're here. And if you stayed to this point, well done, man. 1 Corinthians chapter 3. Paul talks about, hey, man, you guys are all arguing about who's of who, who's of Apollos, who's of Paul. And he's like, dude, y'all got to be of Christ. Like, stop it. Stop it with all this tribalism. It's so stupid, right? But then he gives an illustration. And he talks about building on the foundation of Christ. And there's two ways you can build on that foundation, which is reminiscent of Jesus talking about two houses. But Paul changes the illustration. And he says, you can build on that foundation with wood, hay, and straw, or you can build on it with silver, gold, and precious stones, right? Either one of those things. And then he says, what it's going to happen is it's going to be tested by fire, right? Tested by fire. We don't really know. I mean, I think the speculation is in the afterlife. It's a speculation, but it's probably a fair speculation. But he's talking to Christians. In the afterlife, you've built on the foundation of Christ one of two things. Things that can endure fire, things that will be burned off in fire. Illustratively, that'd be really fair. And again, every single thing I'm saying today, go study for yourself. Go read for yourself. Pay attention to the context. Notice who is the subject, who is the you that he's speaking to. That's going to guide you a ton because that's really clear there when you pay attention to the you, who the you is. That's the subject. That's just good old-fashioned English 101, right? So wood, hay, and straw, silver, gold, and precious stones on the foundation of Christ. And then he says it passes through the fire. And the junk is burned off. And then the precious stuff that remains has reward, right? And that's the way he says it. Doesn't say that the objects are the reward. It's just they endure. It's an illustration. They endure through this fire. And I would say the fire is a purging fire, right? Do that with what you will, but it purges something, purges the wood, hay, and straw that came out of the life of the Christian. So it purges it off. And in that, Paul uses a very interesting phrase, and they suffer loss. They suffer loss. I didn't write it, right? He says they suffer loss. Even that word suffer, right? It's just like there's something there. They suffer loss. But the good things, the pure things, I would at least extrapolate to go, the Sermon on the Mounty things, the things that Jesus said to do because he's the foundation we build on. So whatever he said to do, we do. That's a great map, the Sermon on the Mount, the Sermon on the Plain. Not the only map. I mean, everything Jesus said, we really should use is the map of that. But because I think all the rest of the New Testament are commentators on what Jesus said. But Jesus is the one that really is the foundation of Paul arguing here. The stuff that was Jesus-like goes through and comes up to the other side for reward. But he says there's some, but guess what? Nothing comes through. Nothing comes through. Everything is burned off. He says, but they come through the fire, right? They have nothing to show for it, but they went through this purging process. Everything was burned away, and yet they come out the other side. Is that related to Jesus's warnings about Gehenna? Maybe. I don't know, man. Part of the problem with the scriptures is they oftentimes don't answer all of our questions. Oftentimes, they do this kind of stuff where it's like it's a patchwork. That's why we do the whole buckets and verses, and different traditions have different buckets or different names on the buckets or different verses in the buckets. Because again, we're all trying to do our best with this ancient, rich, but not really interested in being a field manual that answers every question. It's something to be wrestled with. It's something to ask a lot of questions of. It's something to scratch our heads about. But in the places where at least it's saying, hey, this is kind of a big deal, pay attention because I've warned you pretty seriously and severely about what happens when you don't do it my way. We should at least go, hey, that's kind of an important thing. I should pay attention to that. That's a big deal. Maybe I should lean forward in my seat and go, what are the things that then matter? And I say that especially in today's context because I do think that there's a lot of un-Christ-like behavior in the name of Christ. A lot of un-Jesus-like attitude and action, but Jesus is the poster child of that. Christians fighting wrong battles instead of trying to inhabit Christ-like ways. And many people in droves, they're getting turned off. They're getting turned off. And they're not getting turned off because they go, wow, you love me greatly and you're telling me about Jesus and you're showing he loves me, but there's a warning for me and you are loving me into that kingdom, right? It's almost like we think we can stand outside of the wall and lob stuff over without proximity. And that's going to get the trick done. Like if I just say truth as truthy as I can, but it's not done in love, then it misses the mark completely. It misses the mark completely. And I think sometimes there's even confidence in that. If I'm just saying the truth, if they don't like it, tough. And I'm like, well, that may not be the attitude that we're supposed to have, right? If it's if you're supposed to love in truth, you're supposed to love in truth. And you can't just say, oh, I'm giving truth. I'm going to say it's love, but it's really just barbed. No. They got to know we love them. I mean, this is why I think one of the coolest things about Jesus, when it came to sinners, when it came to the disbeliever or the lost or the disenfranchised or whatever, you know what he did with them? He sat with them. He ate with them. He drank with them. He called them their friends. Proximity. He relationally loved them into new life with him. And I think we sometimes settle for saying the sinful lost world, we got to just stand up against them. We just got to post things about them. We just have to turn a blind eye to our people when they do wrong, but we're going to highlight when their people do wrong. And I go, once again, if your mission is to turn people off more than win people over, that's a great tactic, but it might be Millstone-y again, right? And so I think I've probably anchored the point now that we're 1 hour and 25 minutes into this podcast, which at this point, if you've stuck with it, good on you. I'm not sure how many will. And maybe what will get me in trouble is some will only go partway through and they go, oh, this guy's nuts. So in my wrap up, here's my notes, at least the verses. In my wrap up, I want to repeat, this is not really, in that sense, a conversation about the nature of the afterlife for those who don't believe. That's a different topic, a different category. Where it's adjacent is that word Gehenna is used of the people of God as a warning to the people of God for not acting like the people of God. And in that, if our actions cause others to walk away from the faith, never consider the faith, reject the faith because of our bad behaviors, because we're not being like Jesus. Maybe we're being religious. Maybe we're being fundamentalist. Maybe we're being Protestant. Maybe we're being partisan in the name of Jesus, whatever. But if we're doing the things that are turning people off or away, and the cause of that is then their afterlife is shaped by our bad behaviors, Jesus does put a lot of weight on us for that. This idea, it's not on us. And I'm saying that as a Calvinist, man. Like, I get it. Like, there's so much disconnect right there. You know, again, I'm a Karl Barth Calvinist or Bart Calvinist. You know, I'm kind of a different breed of Calvinist. But still, I go, it's still on me, man. Like, if I do things that are turning other people off, not because I'm so clearly like Jesus, but because I'm judgy or bitey or turned a blind eye to my group's bad behaviors, but then I highlight their group's bad behaviors and all that kind of stuff. And if I'm more about money than I am about people, if I'm more about protecting the laws of men than the justice of God, if I'm more about not fulfilling Matthew 25 and the final exam requirements than I am about really wanting to see all of us do that, whatever it is, right? Sermon on the Mount, Sermon on the Plain, definition of love, fruit of the Spirit, those things that I run to all the time. Like, if those things are sacrificed for my own comfort, my own love of land and status and ease, and I want my spiritual thing to make me feel good, whatever else, then I just kind of go like, Jesus says a lot of strong words for that, a lot of strong words. And I would be remiss to not highlight that to the people of God. Like, and I get you're gonna be swimming. If you stay to the end, you're gonna be swimming. And I'm trying to pull you out of the deep end to go, the moral of the story, the purpose of the warnings is so that we would be what Jesus wants us to be. Right? If you get lost into the fear, if you don't do, it misses kind of why he says it. He says it so we will do. Right? As much as all the warnings to Israel. He's saying the warnings as a thing of, so come back to me and do it right. You know, do it right. That's what I'm asking you to do. And I think that was why I was so burdened on Sunday. All right, this kind of pulls it all together. So imagine if I tried to do this on Sunday morning. Like I said, I'm like, it'll take me about 6 minutes to do a super abbreviated version, and really this is going to take an hour and a half to unpack. So I'm doing it here. And I will again say, do I fear the reaction of people on this? Absolutely. Did Jesus say, but don't fear people, rather fear me? And I go, that counts for something. And if I thought that looking at those Gehenna passages were on the fence, right? Like those warnings can go either way, believers or disbelievers, I wouldn't be down this road. Of the 12, 10 are matter-of-factly, at a minimum, those who claim to follow Jesus. He's saying it to people who claim to follow him, right? And then the other two, again, they sit on a fence, but it's to the people who were the leaders of the people of God, and God had been speaking to for, pretty much since the start on not living it out, right? And there's constantly like obedience, then disobedience, then judgment, then restoration, and then wash, rinse, and repeat. And I think Jesus's warnings do lead to restoration, right? Like his warnings lead to restoration. I'm a little bit of a fan of that he doesn't simply say, hey, I'm going to punish, and it not be a learning lesson, a teaching tool, and that might be even in, as we execute Jesus in a poor way in our lives, he does something to course correct this. Like, I don't really know, but I know that if I'm just afraid to simply read these passages and then ask the question, did I read these passages with that word for the wrong group? That they're actually for my tribe and me, as opposed to the outsiders, and the other passages are for outsiders again. Other concepts are for outsiders again. Not divorcing myself from that. But we oftentimes use that word Gehenna to describe what's coming for them, when the New Testament only uses it as a word describing a warning to God's people. Other words for the outsider, these words for the insider. That should at least make us go, A, I should read my Bible carefully, so go and look for yourself. And B, maybe I need to realize that living for Jesus and living like Jesus and living out that map of Jesus isn't like optional. It's top tier stuff. The wide and narrow way comes down to that. The wide road is, hey man, I go to church, read my Bible, have a comfortable life, get fired up about the sin of, our culture. And, I get bitey on social media and I judge everybody that doesn't think like me and all that. That's a wide road in the name of Jesus, because both roads are Jesus adjacent. He's talking to the people he just preached to that claim him, but he's like, the narrow way is hard and few find it. Like, I get it. Doing all that stuff is hard. And many of us we don't want to do all of that. It's just too much sacrifice, too much being the least of these. And we're not going to get walked on. Why? Because we're lions, not sheep, which makes me laugh, because I'm like, no, the Bible says we're sheep. Jesus is a lion. But if you want to invert it, seems like a part of the rebellion that we engage in, right? I'm a lion. I'm not a sheep. No, Jesus is the lion. You're the sheep. And as soon as we leave that posture, maybe that's part of the problem. But if we live like Jesus, and we love like Jesus, and we do speak the truth like Jesus, but we do it with proximity, we do it with relationship, we do it eating and drinking and sitting together, and we do it with investment so that they know, wow, you must really love me, and that's why you share with me. I think if we do that, and if we get rid of the overt hypocrisy and we stop turning a blind eye to our own bad behaviors, and we actually are willing to say, yes, I agree with you, world, that's not like Jesus, and I stand with you on that assessment, and I want to model something different. I want to disrupt the stereotype. If we do that with passion and conviction and tenderness and mercy and attractiveness, then we will be effective everyday missionaries.